Hey guys, welcome to 64 Tech Bits, and in this video we'll be looking into control statements in Java. So what exactly are control statements? Now, control statements are the ones which determine the flow of execution in a program, and they can be broadly categorized into three categories. Hence, there will be three parts to this video. So let me share my iPad screen first. Okay. So the very first category is conditional statements. The second types are looping statements. And the last part are jump statements. And in this video, we'll be covering conditional statements. Now, conditional statements are the ones which determines if a block of code would be run if a certain condition is met, right? Hence the name conditional statements. And when we talk about different types of conditional statements, we can broadly list it down to, okay, let's bring this here. It would be if, else, if, else, if ladder, and switch statement. Now let's understand how each of these statements work. Starting with if. So as the name suggests, if a certain condition is met, execute this code. Right? So this is the first type of conditional statement. Let's look at with a programming real life example. Here we are with the last topic we covered, that is typecasting. You can check out the video. Now let's get into if statements. Right? Now, as I said, if certain condition and curly braces of how if. Now here we have to enter a condition. So for that, let's say int x equals 10 and int y equals 12. I'll say if x is less than y, then execute this statement, right? I'll say system.out.println if works, right? And let's run this. Since this statement is true, you can see this block of code is executed, right? And what happens if you reverse the condition and run the code again? As you can see, no output, blank output. That means since this condition is not met, the certain code, a certain block of code is not executed. And what happens if you write something outside the statement, right? It works though, and run again. Hence, if statements do not block the original path or original flow of control, right? It only affects the flow of control for the block of code it's checking for, right? So if this condition is met, this block of code will be executed. If not, this won't be executed, and the rest of the flow would be continued. Now let's understand the other kinds of conditional statements. Now, as I said, if and a condition is met, the certain block of code is executed. But let's say I want to run something if this is false, right? In this cases, you can use the statement called else. So if this condition is met, this would be executed. If not, this certain piece of code will be executed. I'll copy this, I'll cut the statement, I'll add an else, and I'll print here. Right. Now let's run this code and understand how this works. Right. Since this is a false statement, this chunk of code is executed, right? So this was an easy example of if-else statements or if-else conditional statements. What if I want to do a certain check here, right? In this cases, we get the third kind of conditional statement, that is if, else, if, right? I'll say if, let's introduce another variable. Let's say nz equals 50. And I would say if z is greater than y, you execute this block of code, else execute this block of code. And I'll write system out dot println. I know how if else works, right? Now let's run this. It works though. Why? Because 50 is greater than 12. But what if we change this symbol, right? Now, this statement is false since 12 is greater than 10. This statement is false since 50 is greater than 12. So this statement should be executed. Once you run this, you can see, I know how if else works. So now you can nest as many if else as you want, right? So you can add a if here, let's say if something there, and add else again. Or you can add if again here and have an else, right? Now this specific structure where an if is followed by an else if, it can be single times or multiple times, and eventually ends with an else, is called if else laddering, if else ladder, or a nested if else. Now these are the basic three types of conditional statements, that is if, else if, and else. There's another way where we can perform certain actions while comparing or while checking for certain criteria. For that, we use the fourth type of conditional statement, and that is switch case, where the conditions are based upon one single variable. So I'll say switch, and let's say x, and I'll open bracket, right? Now we can remove all of this together, and to understand switch, let's take a different example altogether, right? Now, switch statements are generally used when you have to perform a decision check based upon a single variable. So let's say int day is equals 1. And here day represents days in week, right? So 0 or let's say 1 would be Monday up till 7, where we go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday until Sunday. Now let's say switch day. And to check a case or to check a specific case, we'll simply mention case 1, where it will check the variable day and see if it's 1, I'll perform the specific code, right? Where you can simply write system dot println, I'll say Monday, and write break. Or we can write these two, where dot println just the followed by another break statement. Now break is another type of control statements. It's one of the jump statements which allows you to stop functioning of a block of code. So if you can see, if the code encounters a break, it will simply stop executing the whole block of code, right? And it continues to execute the rest of the code, apart from the specific block where break was mentioned. So I'll quickly write all of the cases for days in week. As you can see here, I have written the cases for all the days in the week, starting from Monday to Sunday. Now, while writing switch cases where we define each of the cases, you can also define a default case, right? So default, which means if the given output of day doesn't align with all of these cases, simply execute this block of code or this chunk of code. So where you can write this key dot output until then not a valid day, right? And again, day. What happens when you run this? As you can see, Monday. Why? Because the value of day is 1, so it will execute this chunk of code. Let's say if it's 5 and run it again. Here you can see it's Friday. So switch cases works on a value of a single uh, variable. Although there are other ways to use this, but in such cases where if the value of the specific condition, or let's say the statement, is either true or false, using if-else statements are a way better option than using switch cases, right? So if-else if statements are generally used when the execution or the flow of control has to be maintained by a single condition, whereas switch cases are generally used when you want to determine what specific part has to be executed based upon the value of a single variable. So that's the key difference between if-else if statements versus switch statements. Well, there's a different way where you can write one-liner addition of an if-else statement. So let's say system dot out dot println, where I'll see let's say in x equals 10 and y equals 20, right? So I'll simply write if x is greater than y question mark. If it is, then print out x is greater or y is greater. Simply this. So these kind of one-liners work upon the principle that if this statement is true, this specific code would be executed or printed, and if it's false, this statement is executed, right? So let's see when you run this, you can see y is greater, right? If you reverse it, x is greater. So these kind of conditional statements are generally used when you're trying to return a specific value or you're trying to assign some value to a different variable itself. So let's say in z equals x greater than y. If it is, then assign x or assign y, right? And then simply print z, right? And run the statement. Here you can see the value of x, value of z would be 20. So these are about the conditional statements in Java, which is the part 1 of the control statements. In the next video, we'll be looking into loops and jump statements in a single video. So that's all about it for today. I hope you liked the video. Do share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel for further videos in the Java series. So bye bye. Take care.